You don't outsmart someone by overpowering them. You outsmart them by mastering yourself first. When someone threatens your reputation, mocks your intelligence, or makes a move against your ambitions, the natural instinct is to retaliate quickly, forcefully, and publicly. But Marcus Aurelius, Rome's most powerful man, faced daily political deceit and never let emotion make the first move. He knew that power didn't lie in reaction, but in restraint. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Rule 1. Control the inner chessboard before you move a piece. Because no strategy, no clever words, no manipulative move will save you if your mind is chaotic, your ego easily bruised, or your emotions unguarded. You cannot outplay others until you've stopped being outplayed by your own impulses. The unseen battlefield, inside your own mind. Think about this, the people who get tricked, embarrassed, or outplayed in life are rarely taken down by others. More often they sabotage themselves. They act from anger, from insecurity, from haste, and in doing so they reveal their weak spots. This is why the Stoics train their minds relentlessly, not to become passive, but to become unshakable. Epictetus taught that if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That is, the emotional response is your responsibility, not theirs. Master that and suddenly the one who tried to dominate you becomes predictable, even powerless. Modern parallel, let's look at Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison under an apartheid regime that tried to break him physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But Mandela emerged more powerful than when he entered, not by resisting his captors violently, but by mastering his mind. He learned their language, he studied their psychology. He walked out of prison with such calm and vision that he dismantled their system without ever needing to out-yell or out-hate them. That is Stoic dominance. He won because he never let his rage dictate his strategy. Dominance isn't loud, it's calm, quiet precision. Here's the trap: most people confuse dominance with aggression, but dominance, true Stoic dominance, isn't about being feared, it's about being immovable. It's not about shouting louder than others, it's about seeing clearly when everyone else is blinded by their own emotions. So the next time someone tries to rattle you, maybe they interrupt you in a meeting, downplay your success, or test your patience, don't respond right away. Pause, observe, control your breath. This is your inner chessboard moment, because that split second between stimulus and response, that's where dominance is built. Practical application, the 3-second rule. You're in an argument. Someone throws a personal jab, your heart rate spikes. Here's what a Stoic does in those 3 seconds. 1. Observe the emotion, I feel insulted. 2. Name it without acting on it, that's ego, that's anger. 3. Choose your move deliberately, either stay silent or respond with measured clarity, not from pride but from power. You've now turned a reactive moment into a strategic advantage. That's inner dominance, it's invisible. But it shifts everything. Why the world can't handle calm power. Most people are used to emotional outbursts. When you don't react, when your face stays calm and your tone remains steady, they feel unsettled. Because they realize you're not playing their game. They raise their voice, you lower yours, they attack your character. You stay factual, they lose control. You stay composed. Sooner or later, they overplay their hand. And you, because you've trained yourself to watch, to wait, to remain still until it's time to act, make a single move that turns the entire game in your favor. That's Stoicism in motion, and it doesn't require titles, money, or charisma. It requires discipline, the power of invisible dominance. We often chase external control, positions of authority, sharp comebacks, status symbols, thinking that these give us the upper hand. But the Stoics flip the script. True dominance is internal, it's invisible. It's built not in the spotlight, but in quiet, private victories over your ego. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but it was his rule over himself that made him legendary. So when someone tests you, don't show them fire, show them stillness. That's how you outsmart anyone, by never being pulled into their emotional current. You don't beat them at their game, you lead them into yours. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Marcus Aurelius. Rule 2. Leverage the power of perception, see clearly, act calmly. There's a moment, sharp, hot, and instantaneous, when you realize you've been wronged. Someone crossed a line, someone failed you. You feel that fire ignite in your chest, searing through your breath, turning your thoughts into weapons. Rage surges. Your mind races to retaliate, to speak, to prove, to punish. But in this very moment, the Stoic would ask, are you seeing things as they are or as they appear through the fog of emotion? To the untrained mind, perception is reality. But to the Stoic, perception is simply a tool, a lens that must be constantly refined, cleansed, disciplined. Because how you interpret an event determines not only your emotions, but your next move, and your next move is your character. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the midst of imperial duties and endless provocation, said, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it, and it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now. These words are not a poetic comfort. They are a profound strategy for life. Marcus is telling you that the event, whatever it is, has no inherent power over your peace. It's your interpretation that breathes fire into it. Your judgment gives it teeth. And that means your clarity or lack of it determines your freedom. This is not passivity, and it certainly isn't weakness. On the contrary, it's the most radical kind of strength. The ability to pause between event and reaction, to insert reason into the chaos, and to choose your response. This is where modern people get Stoicism wrong. They confuse perception control with indifference. But Seneca clarified that distinction centuries ago. It is not that the Stoic feels no emotion, he wrote, but that they are not mastered by emotion. You feel the injustice, you acknowledge the sting, but then you step back and see. This is what we might call strategic clarity. Let's take an example from modern life. Imagine a colleague takes credit for your idea. Your gut tightens, you feel betrayed, disrespected, unseen. But if you act in that emotional heat, lashing out, confronting them publicly, letting the insult shape your day, you've handed over your power. You've let their behavior dictate your behavior. A Stoic approach would look like this: pause, breathe, ask. What's actually happening here? Is this personal, or are they driven by insecurity? Are they even aware of what they've done? And regardless of their motives, who do I want to be in response to this? That last question is critical. Because Stoicism always brings you back to your own power, not the power to dominate others, but the power to remain whole in the face of offense. This doesn't mean inaction, it means intentional action. Instead of reacting from a wound, you respond from a place of strength. You might address it calmly, directly, and privately, or you might choose to let it go entirely, understanding that some battles are not worth the inner disturbance. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This idea isn't meant to make you passive, it's meant to make you free. Because the clearer your perception, the less you are dragged by impulse, ego, and emotional reflex. And in that space you gain command not of others, but of yourself. And that, the Stoics believed, was the only true command worth pursuing. Another way to frame this is with the metaphor of a storm. Most people are like ships tossed by waves, reacting to every gust of wind and thunderclap with panic. But the Stoic is anchored. They acknowledge the storm, but they do not become the storm. Their perception is not clouded by noise, they see. And because they see clearly, they act with precision. This kind of inner stillness is not innate, it's trained. It's built over time through practice, reflection, and relentless honesty with yourself. It's also not easy. You will fail. You will get pulled into emotion. You will forget. But each time you remember, even seconds later, you're strengthening that inner muscle. You're moving closer to the clarity the Stoics revered. So the next time you're wronged, slighted, dismissed, pause. Don't react. Don't indulge the story your ego is spinning. Just look clearly. Ask, what is truly happening here? Then act, not from pain, but from principle. Because when perception is mastered, everything else falls into place. You no longer need to control the world, you only need to control how you see it, and from that vision flows your power. Rule 3, speak little, see everything, the strategic power of silence. In an age overflowing with opinions, chatter, and reactionary noise, the quiet man is often mistaken for the weak one. But to the Stoics, silence was never a sign of absence, it was a presence of a higher kind. It was clarity, it was control, it was power. Seneca once wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." Those words hold even more weight in a world that values volume over virtue. When you adopt the Stoic rule to speak little and observe everything, you step out of the reactive current and into the stillness of intentionality. You begin to see what others miss. The modern world is addicted to talking. Social media thrives on instant opinions. News networks survive on sensational urgency. Even in everyday conversations, silence is often treated as awkward, something to be filled. But what happens when you resist that urge, when you pause before speaking and instead sharpen your attention? You gain power, invisible power, the power in restraint. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the Roman Empire and one of Stoicism's greatest minds, governed with an introspective calm. His journal, Meditations, wasn't written for anyone else. It was a private record of his own attempts to govern his reactions, his thoughts, and his actions. He rarely spoke more than was necessary, and when he did speak, it was intentional. Why? Because he knew what most of us forget. The more you speak, the more you reveal, and not just to others, but to yourself. Talking can trick the mind into believing it understands more than it does. Words offer comfort, but silence offers clarity. The person who speaks little isn't withholding out of fear. He is collecting, watching, weighing, letting others expose their impulses while he disciplines his own. In negotiations, those who speak the least often have the upper hand. In conflict, those who don't react immediately often hold the real leverage. In leadership, the wisest aren't the ones who fill the room with sound, they're the ones who listen, reflect, and then deliver a sentence that shifts the direction of the entire conversation. That is Stoic silence, not muteness, but mastery. Why observation is a superpower. When you speak less, your senses sharpen. You begin to notice what lies beneath people's words. The tension in their jaw, the hesitation in their tone, the insecurity hidden behind their confidence. These aren't things the average person sees because they're too busy preparing their next reply. But you're paying attention. Stoicism teaches that external events don't disturb us, our judgments do. By observing everything and judging little, you give yourself the gift of neutrality, and with neutrality comes wisdom. The moment you stop projecting assumptions onto a situation, you begin to see it as it truly is. The Stoics called this proherses, your capacity to choose your response. It is only by observing before reacting that you access this power, and the fewer your words, the greater your discipline, not just of speech, but of thought. Famous silence, a modern example. Think of someone like Warren Buffett. In meetings, he's known not for dominating the room, but for listening quietly, sometimes for hours. He speaks little, but when he does, people lean in. Why? Because silence builds weight. The less you speak, the more each word matters. It's no coincidence that some of the most revered leaders in history, Lincoln, Mandela, and even modern-day figures like Tim Cook, are known for their calm, deliberate speech. They speak when it counts. And the rest of the time, they're watching, absorbing, preparing. Silence as inner fortress. To master the art of speaking little and seeing everything, you must first cultivate an inner stillness. This isn't easy. It means resisting the urge to prove yourself, to fill space with words, to be seen and acknowledged constantly. But that resistance is where Stoic growth lives. As Epictetus put it, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. That's not just practical advice, that's a blueprint for invisible power. The kind of power that doesn't shout, it doesn't broadcast, it watches, it listens. And when the moment is right, it moves with precision and impact. The Stoic challenge. Here's the challenge for you. The next time you're in a room where everyone is eager to talk, choose to remain silent, not passively but actively. Use that time to observe. Not just people's words, but their intentions, their patterns, and their blind spots. You'll start to see beneath the surface. You'll begin to predict reactions before they occur. You'll hold your energy rather than spending it. And when you do finally speak, your voice will carry weight, because it will come from stillness, not insecurity. The less you speak, the more you notice. The more you notice, the more you understand. And the more you understand, the fewer words you need. In a world that overvalues noise, let your silence speak for you. That's not retreat, that's invisible dominance, the Stoic way. Rule 4, never argue, always influence, the Stoic art of subtle persuasion. In the noisy theater of daily life, it's tempting to believe that victory is found in the last word, the sharpest comeback, or the public dismantling of someone's flawed opinion. But the Stoics, ever watchful of the soul's erosion through petty conflicts, warned us of a deeper truth, one that today's psychology is finally beginning to validate. Arguments do not enlighten, they entrench. They solidify positions. They stir up pride and close down reason, and perhaps more dangerously, they tie your well-being to the reactions of others. That is why Rule 4 in the art of invisible power is this: never argue, always influence. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius cautioned, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. This wasn't a call to pacifism, nor was it an appeal to moral superiority. It was a recognition of power, the kind of quiet strength that does not stoop, does not chase, and does not need to prove. For Marcus and the Stoics, influence was not about overpowering. It was about realignment, helping others shift without feeling defeated. And that begins when you stop trying to win, the trap of argument. Consider the last time you were in a heated debate. Not a calm discussion, but a true clash, raised voices, quick rebuttals, perhaps even a feeling of self-righteous adrenaline. In those moments, no one is listening. Each party is rehearsing their next line. Each is dug into the fortress of their worldview. This is the psychological equivalent of siege warfare, and like most sieges, it ends in exhaustion, not growth. The Stoics understood this long before cognitive biases had names. They didn't need to identify the backfire effect or confirmation bias to know that people cling tighter to their beliefs when attacked. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This wasn't just a tip for managing temper. It was a strategy. To delay is to detach. To detach is to disarm the ego, both yours and theirs. When you refuse to argue, you aren't conceding. You're choosing a different terrain, one where influence can take root. Influence is an internal posture. Stoicism teaches us that influence is not a performance, it's a discipline of presence. It doesn't begin with your words, it begins with your intentions. Are you speaking to dominate or to guide? Are you trying to elevate the truth or to elevate yourself? The Stoic approach to influence is subtle. Epictetus reminds us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. In other words, when you argue, you are giving someone access to your inner peace, allowing them to manipulate your reactions, distract your reason, and cloud your clarity. Real influence begins by reclaiming that peace. It is cultivated in silence, maintained in restraint, and expressed in ways that don't feel like pressure, but like revelation. It's when the other person walks away thinking they came to the conclusion themselves. That's not manipulation. That's wisdom made contagious, silence as influence. It might sound paradoxical, but the most powerful moment in persuasion is often the one you choose not to speak. Silence in Stoic philosophy is not the absence of action, it is action at its most refined. It says, I don't need to convince you, I will show you. In that space of calm refusal, you disarm defensiveness. You hold up a mirror instead of a sword. Marcus Aurelius observed, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, let your behavior speak. Let your emotional control demonstrate something more evolved than argument ever could. People remember composure more than they remember words, and when the moment does call for speech, not silence, the Stoic chooses questions over assertions. Questions like, what makes you feel so certain about that? What led you to see it that way? What would it take to see this differently? These are not attacks, they are invitations. They do not threaten the ego, they gently expand its borders. Why this rule matters more than ever. In an age of polarization, where digital platforms reward outrage over insight, the ability to influence without conflict has become a rare and powerful skill. And like all things rare, it's misunderstood. Many will see your refusal to argue as weakness. Let them. The Stoic does not need the world's approval to know they've chosen the stronger path. Invisible power is not about dominance in the usual sense. It's about mastering the battlefield of ego, yours and others. The person who can remain unprovoked, who doesn't take the bait, who doesn't need to win the moment, that is the person others quietly begin to follow. Not because they're loud, but because they're clear, because they lead themselves first. So remember this, you do not need to raise your voice to raise your influence. You do not need to win arguments to win respect. You only need to live in a way that others feel compelled to mirror. That's Stoic leadership. That's invisible power. Rule 5, stay calm when they try to trigger you, the Stoic art of emotional sovereignty. Imagine a soldier standing alone on a battlefield, unmoved as arrows fly overhead and chaos erupts around him. He does not flinch, he does not retaliate in haste. He waits not because he is weak, but because he is powerful. That, in essence, is what the Stoics taught us about emotional restraint. To be calm in the face of provocation is not to suppress your feelings, it is to transcend them. It is to choose sovereignty over slavery to impulse. In Book 6 of Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." It's one of his most powerful reminders that the true victor is not the one who retaliates with sharper words or stronger force, but the one who refuses to be transformed by the poison of others. Emotional restraint is not a denial of emotion. It's a demonstration of mastery, and in a world that constantly tries to trigger you through insult, manipulation, or passive aggression, this is your shield. The culture of provocation. We live in a time where reaction has become currency. Outrage fuels algorithms, insults garner attention. Entire platforms are designed to provoke emotional outbursts because they know, very practically, that emotion is profitable. Calm does not go viral, anger does. But what happens to your inner world when you allow others to dictate your emotional weather? You lose ownership of your peace. You become reactive, not reflective. And you drift farther from the Stoic ideal of equanimity, the state of being grounded, stable, and inwardly composed no matter the storm outside. As Epictetus so wisely said, any person capable of angering you becomes your master. He can anger you only when you permit yourself to be disturbed by him. This is not a call for passivity, it's a call for higher control. In Stoicism, you are not expected to be emotionless. You are expected to govern your emotions so they do not govern you. The Stoic discipline of delay. The first step to mastering emotional restraint is the art of pause. When provoked, do nothing at first. Let the fire burn in your chest without pouring it onto others. The Stoics trained for this. They rehearsed insults in their minds. They visualized disruptions. They practiced premeditatio malorum, the anticipation of misfortune, so that when the test came, it felt familiar. Seneca, a man who navigated the deadly politics of imperial Rome, wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." That includes imagined offenses. Most triggers are not about what was said, but how we interpret it. When someone insults you, ask yourself, does this harm me, or do I simply dislike it? There's a crucial difference. The Stoic examines the judgment underneath the anger and often finds it is weak or baseless. You are not angry because someone disrespected you. You are angry because you believe their opinion has power over you. But unless you give it permission. Strategic calm in the face of manipulation. Staying calm is not just personal discipline, it is strategic advantage. When people try to trigger you, they are attempting to gain control. They want your emotional reaction so they can frame the situation, cast you as unstable, or escalate the conflict to their benefit. In resisting the trigger, you preserve your clarity and authority. This is not theoretical, it's political, psychological, and deeply human. In negotiation, the calmest voice in the room has the most power. In conflict, the most composed individual controls the tempo. The Stoics knew that the person who can remain unmoved has already won. Marcus Aurelius, though he ruled an empire, understood this intimately. If someone does wrong, he wrote, it is because they are mistaken. Teach them, don't hate them. Your calm becomes a teacher. It reflects a higher form of strength that others cannot easily understand, and that's why it is so potent. Emotional restraint is the foundation of freedom. When you develop the capacity to remain calm, when others insult you, challenge you, or try to provoke a reaction, you free yourself. You're no longer shackled to the behavior of others. You act from values, not reactions. You respond deliberately, not reflexively. And that is the essence of Stoic freedom. Not doing whatever you feel, but choosing what is right in spite of how you feel. This doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice. It means thoughtful engagement. It means refusing to let your enemy define your energy. It means, as Marcus wrote, to be like the rock against which the waves crash, and it stands firm and the raging of the sea falls still around it. The next time someone tests your patience, don't merely hold back your words, hold back your judgment. Step outside yourself, see the event as a Stoic would, as a chance to train virtue, a test of your internal fortress, not something to survive but something to master. Calm is not your default, it is your discipline. And every moment of restraint is a vote for who you are becoming. Rule 6, control the frame, don't compete within it. In every encounter, be it conversation, confrontation, or collaboration, there exists an invisible architecture. The frame, it's not merely about what's being said, but the context in which it's said. The frame is the unspoken agreement about what matters, whose values are dominant, and what is at stake. Most people step into this frame blindly. They play the game as it's presented to them. The Stoic, however, learns not just to participate, but to reshape the very board on which the game is played. To control the frame is not about domination in the shallow, aggressive sense. It is about quiet, steady agency. It is about refusing to be dragged into reactive patterns and instead defining the terms of your own engagement, as Epictetus reminds us. Remember, it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. The frame, in essence, is our judgment, but it's also the judgment others hope we will adopt. To control the frame is to hold firm to your philosophical ground and gently tilt the landscape in your favor. The invisible rules of every interaction. Imagine two people in a heated debate. One is defensive, justifying, reacting. The other is calm, asking questions, guiding attention. Who's really in control? It's not the loudest, it's the one who owns the perspective being followed. This is why Stoics train themselves not just in logic and reason, but in perspective discipline. Marcus Aurelius often journaled to remind himself that external events are only stories we tell ourselves, and therefore subject to interpretation. Once you accept this, you realize the greatest power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling the lens through which the situation is seen. Seneca, in his letters, spoke often of how the wise man does not become angry not because he lacks passion, but because he chooses not to grant others the power to dictate his emotional landscape. In doing so, he's not avoiding the frame, he's redrawing it. The wise person sees the insult not as an attack, but as a signal of the other's suffering. He sees the chaos not as pressure, but as training. He reframes life on Stoic terms and lives above the fray. Modern applications, from boardrooms to battlefields. In modern life, controlling the frame shows up in countless subtle ways. In a meeting, someone may frame your idea as risky. You can either defend it and thus validate their frame, or you can reframe it. It's bold, yes, and necessary in times of change. The conversation just shifted. You are now defining the terrain. Social media thrives on framing. Outrage is often the default lens. You can either react within that framework, arguing, justifying, attacking, or you can abstain from the performance entirely. True influence comes from refusing to play a rigged game and inviting others into a quieter, wiser arena. Even in relationships, this principle applies. Someone says, "You never listen." The reactive frame is one of guilt or blame. But if you pause, listen deeply, and say, "It sounds like you're not feeling heard. Help me understand," you've just shifted the emotional frame from accusation to collaboration. You've refused to be baited into defensiveness. You've stepped into a higher form of power, not control over the other, but control over the energy of the exchange. Frame control versus ego control. It's worth clarifying. Controlling the frame is not manipulation, it is disciplined perspective leadership. Manipulators twist the frame for selfish gain. The Stoic, on the other hand, anchors the frame in truth and virtue. In fact, the most dangerous opponent is not the one who yells, but the one who quietly imposes a toxic frame, such as urgency, scarcity, or fear. Entire organizations operate this way. They create atmospheres where people feel constantly behind, inadequate, or replaceable. The antidote, a Stoic mind that steps back and asks, what assumptions are being made here, and do I accept them? That question is at the heart of frame control. It's not about resisting reality, but about choosing your response to it and gently nudging others to see through a clearer lens. As Viktor Frankl, who drew heavily on Stoic insight, wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, trained to set the frame quietly." Controlling the frame is not something you do loudly. In fact, if people notice you doing it, you're likely doing it wrong. It begins with an inner stillness, a refusal to be moved by chaos, insult, or flattery, and it expresses itself through calm questions, clear values, and a consistent tone. Every time someone tries to push you into emotional reactivity, every time someone presents a dilemma as this or that, you can step back and reframe. Is this really a crisis, or is it a test of endurance? Is this person attacking me or revealing their pain? Is this a threat or an invitation to grow? Final thought, own the lens, shape the world. The true battlefield is not external. It is the framing of our own experience and how we allow others to shape it. The Stoics, through thousands of hours of reflection, hardship, and clarity, learned that reality is shaped not by what happens to us, but by how we see it. When you control the frame, you don't need to dominate others, you illuminate a better path. You don't compete for power, you redefine what power means, and in doing so, you gain the invisible strength to walk through chaos unmoved, to speak with calm authority, and to influence the world, not by force but by philosophical clarity. Rule 7: Influence through inquiry, the Stoic art of guiding without force. There's a quiet power that shapes thoughts, shifts conversations, and bends outcomes, not with commands or ultimatums, but with something far more elegant. The well-placed question, to guide without force, to lead without domination, this is the hallmark of a Stoic mind in control. Rule 7 in the arsenal of invisible power is this: don't command, question, and through those questions, guide. In a world addicted to opinion and loud assertion, the Stoic approach stands in radical contrast. Where others seek to overpower, the Stoic seeks to orient. Where others strive to be heard, the Stoic listens not passively but tactically. They understand that every exchange is a subtle negotiation of influence, and that the sharpest tool in that exchange is not the raised voice, but the raised question. Epictetus once said, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." But more revealing still is the Stoic tendency to reverse that lens, not merely to seek meaning in their own speech, but to gently pull meaning out of others. To ask with calm precision, "What do you mean by that?" or "Is that necessarily true?" is not an act of defiance, but of disciplined engagement. It is a way of leading someone out of their assumptions, not by confrontation, but by gentle excavation. This form of influence is ancient and enduring. Socrates, arguably the intellectual godfather of Stoicism, mastered the art of the question. His entire method, now known as the Socratic method, was not to assert knowledge, but to expose gaps in the knowledge of others. Through layered, often humble inquiry, he dismantled arrogance and revealed truth, not by telling people what to think, but by helping them think better. That's Stoic leadership at its finest, not domination, but elevation. To question is to honor the agency of the other. It assumes they are capable of arriving at a higher insight, not because you've imposed it upon them, but because you've led them there with care. This is why great leaders, from Marcus Aurelius to Abraham Lincoln, rarely issued ultimatums. Instead, they asked questions that invited reflection. What would happen if we did nothing? How might this serve the greater good? What matters most right now? Modern neuroscience now confirms what the Stoics intuited millennia ago. That when you ask someone a question, especially one that invites introspection, you temporarily quiet their reactive brain. You activate the part of the mind responsible for reasoning, not defense. This is why questions disarm. They don't just create space in the conversation, they create space in the other person's mind. And when people feel seen, when they feel that their thoughts are not being crushed but curated, they become more open. This is the true nature of influence, not to overpower, but to invite alignment. A Stoic doesn't need to crush dissent to lead. They only need to illuminate the next step and let the other walk toward it of their own accord. This is especially crucial in moments of conflict. When tempers rise and egos swell, the average person reacts with declarations. "You're wrong, that's not true, you don't get it." But the Stoic holds steady and responds with inquiry. "What leads you to believe that? Have you considered?" Or simply, "Is that helping or hurting you?" Each question becomes a mirror, not an attack, but a quiet reflection of truth. Seneca reminds us, "A sword never kills anybody. It is a tool in the killer's hand." So it is with arguments and commands. They are tools, but dangerous ones because they invite resistance. Questions, on the other hand, invite participation. They shift the dynamic from adversarial to cooperative. And that shift is what makes Stoic influence so enduring. You're not silencing people, you're deepening the conversation. You're not seizing control, you're creating space for it to be handed to you voluntarily. In your own life, consider how often you default to correcting instead of inquiring. Whether in relationships, at work, or intense debates, your greatest leverage is not in having the best answer, but in asking the clearest question. Why do you think that? What does that mean to you? If you acted on that thought, what would be the outcome? These are not just prompts, they are doorways. Each one unlocks deeper understanding, builds trust, and establishes a kind of soft but undeniable authority. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of Stoic power. It's invisible because it doesn't look like power at all. It looks like listening. It sounds like curiosity, but underneath it lies mastery, not of others, but of self. So the next time you feel the urge to assert, consider instead the path of the philosopher. Hold your fire, steady your breath, and ask not to trap, but to reveal. Because in the end, the strongest leaders don't raise their voice. They raise the quality of the conversation. Rule 8, know when to withdraw, master the final move. There's a kind of power that does not require confrontation, bravado, or spectacle. It is quiet, patient, and absolute. It is the kind of power Marcus Aurelius carried not with his crown, but with his restraint. It is the power of knowing when to step away, not in defeat, but in full control. The Stoics were not obsessed with dominance. They didn't seek to overpower others in the way we often see in modern culture, through argument, visibility, or constant engagement. They sought instead to master the only realm that truly belongs to us. Our own judgment, our own mind, and from that mastery arose their most misunderstood move, withdrawal. But let's be clear, withdrawal in the Stoic sense is not escapism. It is not cowardice. It is not passive avoidance. It is discernment, it is restraint in action. It is the deliberate refusal to participate in a game that leads only to the loss of peace. Seneca once wrote, "What progress have I made? I have begun to be a friend to myself." That is what withdrawal protects, the sanctuary of the self, the fortress of your inner clarity. There are moments in life when the wisest course is not to confront an insult, not to prove a point, not to chase after closure, but simply to step away with your integrity intact. You may have experienced this, a heated conversation where nothing productive is happening, only escalation, or a workplace dynamic where your presence is being drained by invisible politics. Or a relationship that has turned into a battlefield of subtle manipulations and passive aggression. In such moments, we are tempted to respond, to push back, to win. But here, Stoicism whispers something radical. You do not have to win in their arena. You do not have to respond on their terms. You can leave. You can choose a higher ground, one where your mind remains your own, and your energy is not bartered for momentary ego satisfaction. Epictetus reminded us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Withdrawal, then, is not a retreat from strength, but a retreat into strength. It's recognizing that the external world will always try to pull you into noise, drama, and distraction, but you have the capacity to say, not today, not on those terms. And this principle applies not just to arguments, but to life's larger structures. There are seasons where the most powerful thing you can do is exit, quietly, clearly, and completely, to leave a job that misaligns with your values. To let go of a circle that thrives on gossip or superficial validation. To step back from a digital platform that consumes your attention without nourishing your soul. In doing so, you are not walking away from responsibility, you are walking toward alignment. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Withdraw into yourself." It is in the nature of the rational mind to be self-content with acting rightly, and the calm it thereby enjoys. This withdrawal isn't always physical, it is mental. It is the decision to no longer invest your inner world in outer chaos. And yet this withdrawal is often misread by others. They may call you distant, they may say you've changed, let them. Because the path of the Stoic is not about appearing powerful, it's about being unshakable regardless of perception. Let's consider a real-world example, General George Washington. During the Revolutionary War, there were several moments where rather than press a military attack, he chose to retreat, to preserve his army, to bide his time, to avoid unnecessary destruction. These withdrawals were seen by many as weakness, but history would show otherwise. They were strategic. They were rooted in clarity, not fear. Washington knew that true victory is not found in winning every skirmish, it's found in winning the war. You are faced with similar decisions daily, though the battlefield looks different. Your war is not always with others, it's with your impulses, your ego, your fear of being misunderstood. And withdrawal in this context is not disengagement from life, it is deep engagement with your principles. So ask yourself, what conversations am I forcing that no longer serve truth? What dynamics am I tolerating that continually cost me peace? What spaces have I outgrown that I still linger in out of habit, fear, or guilt? And then remember, leaving is not failure. Letting go is not loss. Sometimes the most revolutionary act in a culture addicted to noise is silence. Sometimes the boldest move in a world addicted to visibility is invisibility. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. The final move isn't about burning bridges, it's about building a path back to yourself. Finally, the quiet strength you always had. In a world that constantly pulls at your emotions, your attention, and your identity, remember this. The power to respond or not to respond has always been yours. You are not obligated to react, you are not required to explain, and you are certainly not bound to play every game someone invites you into. The Stoics taught that between stimulus and response there is a sacred space. That space is your kingdom. It's where your character is forged, where self-discipline is exercised, and where peace is protected. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. This isn't just a quote, it's a way of life. And if you've made it this far, you already sense its truth deep within you. So here's the challenge and the invitation. The next time someone tests your boundaries, tries to pull you into drama, or tempts you into proving your worth, don't. Just don't. Breathe, observe, and let your silence speak. Let your calm cut deeper than any insult. Let your presence, not your reaction, define the moment. If you're ready to embody this power, to train your mind like a warrior and live with unshakable calm, then this channel is your home. Subscribe to continue walking this path of inner strength, and tell us in the comments which Stoic rule spoke to you the most and why. Your insight might be the reminder someone else needs today. Stay calm, stay grounded, stay sovereign. And we'll meet again right here on the path of reason.